All right. Good morning and good afternoon, or even good evening, perhaps, to some of our audience. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Nick Cain. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Innovation here at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And if you've registered and RSVP'd, you know that this is the AI Talks, our series where we bring on nonprofits and civil society champions who are leveraging AI and data for good. I'm so excited for today's conversation, which will focus on carbon removals and the role of data and open science to accelerate what we think is a really important set of technologies to be thinking about in the context of a robust strategy on reducing the effects of climate change. And I'm so excited to be joined by two of our amazing partners, Freya Chay and Vilas Rao, today for this conversation. I'll briefly introduce them, share a little bit more about what I hope we're going to get through in today's conversation, what I hope we'll learn, and then we'll dive right into it. So Freya is a program lead at CarbonPlan, which is a nonprofit that works to support the transparency and scientific integrity of climate solutions through data and tooling. Her team researches emerging approaches to carbon dioxide removal, focusing on both the science and governance structures needed to ensure real and responsible climate impact. Freya's got real deep expertise in this topic. She has a master's in Earth Systems and a bachelor's in computer science from Stanford University. And importantly, I think lives in Alaska, where the impacts of climate change and questions of adaptation are part of her daily life. So welcome, Freya. And Vilas Rao is the co-founder and COO at Cascade Climate, which is a nonprofit that is laser focused on accelerating high potential climate solutions. We're going to talk a lot about enhanced rock weathering in particular, which has deep ties to agriculture as a path to scale. And so that's where Vilas's background comes in. He has been a business leader in the agriculture space for 15 years, really focused on ways to apply technology and agricultural production systems to drive a more sustainable and secure food supply. Vilas also has deep academic expertise, a master's in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School, and a bachelor's in economics from Stanford. So welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Nick.
I'm so excited to jump into the conversation. I'm not going to do the really important work of fully demystifying what carbon dioxide removals, or CDR, actually is. We're gonna let the experts do that. But very broadly, CDR is a term that we'll use to cover sort of a growing set of technologies that pull carbon dioxide, or CO2, out of the air and store it permanently. Why is this something that we are interested in here at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation? Well, if you follow our work, you know, first of all, that we are broadly interested in where the role of data and technology can intersect with really tough problems in the world and drive new and innovative solutions. Much of that work is focused on applications of machine learning and AI. Sometimes that work is also inclusive of sort of building the data and early infrastructure such that AI and machine learning models can eventually be even more involved in driving positive change. We've done a lot of work in the area of climate with about a $12 million grant-making portfolio annually for the last 5-6 years. And these are two partners that are part of that work and really driving, I think, critical work in this particular subcategory of working to mitigate the effects of climate change, which is CDR. So with that, I want to jump in. And if you wouldn't mind, Freya, I'm going to turn to you to help our audience just do a little bit of that demystification. Can you tell us, when you're out talking to your friends who probably know you work in this space and have been knowing that you care deeply about this space for a long time, and they say, what the heck is CDR? What do you say? And if you wouldn't mind orienting us also particularly to open system CDR and distinguishing that between open and closed systems, I think it'll be helpful for this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you gave a pretty good single sentence. What is CDR? CDR is this really broad family of approaches for taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and putting it somewhere else. And the reason we think it's investing in as a global society is that we really don't have a story about how to stabilize global temperatures without it. So a really interesting part of, and kind of useful feature of climate science is that the warming the world experiences is pretty much directly proportional to how much CO2 we emit. That means to stop warming, any CO2 we put up needs to come back down. And if we wanted to reduce temperatures further, it means that the removals have to outstrip any ongoing emissions. Carbon removal is the tool that would unlock those net zero or net negative outcomes for temperature stabilization, for reducing temperatures. And we think that's really important for not just top level climate goals, but also for justice, for reducing harms in the near term and in the long term for generations to come. As you said, there are a bunch of different CDR approaches. They intervene in all sorts of pieces of the carbon cycle on land, in oceans, using different tools, chemistry, biology. It's a really interdisciplinary set of things. Today, we plan to focus on open system CDR approaches. So these are approaches where the intervention humans make kind of produces a cascade of effects in a natural system. It piggybacks on a natural system in a way that removes carbon from the atmosphere. What's really cool about those approaches is that it takes less, usually, infrastructure and energy from us. If you want to do carbon removal at scale, that really matters. So open system approaches have this potential to be scalable and with less infrastructure and cost. The other thing that I find really exciting about them is that there's so much to learn, because they are so interdisciplinary and because they interact with natural systems that have big variability. I think they are a natural driver for the conversation about what kind of science we need to figure out what carbon removal works and what carbon removal doesn't work, and how we progress into a future where we have really good climate outcomes. So yeah, the open system label has these general characteristics. I think a really useful example is this family of approaches called alkalinity enhancement. So alkalinity, you can go deep in the chemistry, but basically when water has more alkalinity, it can hold more dissolved carbon without getting acidic. And so we could imagine in many parts of the carbon cycle, increasing alkalinity such that water in soils, in streams, and eventually in the ocean can hold more carbon, take it out of the atmosphere. Enhanced rock weathering refers to putting rocks on fields in locations where we think they'll dissolve and introduce alkalinity to the system. Another example is adding alkalinity directly to the ocean. But this is an example of we make a first intervention, and then as that intervention propagates through space and time, you get atmospheric carbon removal.
Amazing. Thank you for actually going sort of deep and complex while keeping it, I think, really, really understandable for the audience. I really appreciate that. I don't know if you meant to tee up Vilas so gracefully, but you said that open system carbon removal is a place where human intervention then has cascading effects down through sort of existing natural processes. Vilas, your nonprofit is called Cascade Climate. I don't know if that's a coincidence or perhaps an intentional choice in the name for the organization. But this, I think, excitement that you just shared, Freya, is definitely what's captured my imagination, and I'm sure many in this space, and is also the source of some of the uncertainty and perhaps questions about whether any of this will actually ever reach the scale that we want it to or need it to get to that net zero or net negative outcome you described, Freya. So Vilas, could you just start to help us understand? I see your all's work as a real, you're inserting yourself right into that discussion, right? Acknowledging both the opportunity, expansive opportunity, and sources of uncertainty that may prevent us from scaling this work. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like, how you're addressing that, how your work fits into that conversation.
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me. Cascade was definitely an intentional choice there, both the cascading effects of the systems that we operate in on planet Earth, and also the cascading effects that we hope our work can have. So maybe just I can give like a Schoolhouse Rock orientation to the what does the carbon removal market look like? Who are the players? What's involved? And from that can kind of describe what work we do. So carbon removal is often basically just broken down into projects where each project is trying to remove a certain amount of carbon from the atmosphere. And really the starting point for a lot of the work is what we call a project developer, the person who's actually the team, the company that's actually removing the carbon. That might be spreading rock dust on a cornfield. It might be removing crop residue and pyrolyzing it. It might be doing a whole variety of techniques. On the other side of this market are buyers who are, whether it's a corporate or a government who's wanting credit for removing that carbon. And in between are, you could call it a supply chain of actors. There are registries which actually issue the credits according to certain methodologies. There are verifiers that are auditing those practices to make sure that they're done according to a certain quality standard. I think most people's mental models for carbon removal and this work is in the context of what we call the voluntary carbon market, where there are voluntary, unrequired commitments that a buyer is making. I think it's worth noting that this market is quite small. It's about $2 billion. I think given the amount we talk about it, it can sometimes seem like really, really large. But I think it's worth noting that we're also starting to see carbon removal be talked about in the context of what we call compliance markets, or other government programs where governments are starting to require and regulate not just emissions reductions, but they're starting to include carbon removal into that as well. So maybe that's the Schoolhouse Rock version. There's obviously more than that. There are the farmers who are involved in the case of enhanced rock weathering. There are local communities. There are industrial partners, banks and financiers. What we as Cascade try to do is work across this network of participants in order to drive high quality carbon removal and accelerate our path to do that at scale.
Thank you. I really appreciate the kind of putting the, almost in some sense, the chess pieces on the board and trying to understand how all these players intersect. Both of you have a shared interest. Both of your organizations have a shared interest in and a shared, some at the highest level, shared strategy of really advancing the role of open data and science, and data sharing and data visibility. And I think as a tool to help this market both grow and function effectively, and also to drive intelligent policy that might affect compliance markets, as you mentioned, Vilas, or even voluntary markets. You can imagine how those policies might be shaped in ways that would either incentivize or de-incentivize this particular type of removal as something that's viable in those schemes. And in an early market, also, as project developers are vying for dollars and potentially limited investment capital, excuse me, there can be some tension. There's some inherent tension in sharing and transparency, as we all sort of have there's both a sort of an individual interest and a collective interest that we all that are perhaps sometimes in tension with one another. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time helping the audience understand that, because I think it's really central to the story of where data and modeling is, really plays a key role here. So Freya, I wanted to come back to you, and could you share a little bit more about the work that you all are doing to advance open data and research in the field, and particularly, and kind of like who are the main audiences for some of that research? How are you getting it out into their hands, and who are you hoping to influence?
Yeah, maybe as a starting point, I mean, we kind of centered in on markets, but I think the real game here is learning. We don't know enough about open system CDR right now to say like, yes, let's do it. It's not about scaling. It's not about deployment. It's about learning. And to the extent that these approaches are getting funding via markets, I think we should all be really, really focused on how those deployments help us learn the next thing about how these systems actually work in the real world. You can do that through markets, but of course you can do it through lots of other means. And there is a lot of progress happening also in the conventional academic world. So I would say a lot of our work maybe steps back from the market specific context and says, how can we help everybody either make progress on those knowledge gaps or understand what the knowledge gaps are in a really honest way? So an example of helping to make progress on the knowledge gaps, we think the values of open science, like sharing results early, quickly, are really, really important for this field to progress. And one of the projects we recently did was building a preprint server specifically for carbon dioxide removal data and research. So if audience members don't know, preprints are really common in other fields. They're basically a way to share your research manuscript before it goes through the peer review process. It's a way to share it early, get feedback early, start the conversation early, maybe even years before that research is ultimately published. And critically, it's shared in an open way. It's never going to end up behind a paywall. We thought that because CDR is so interdisciplinary, right now, what preprinting is happening is really distributed across all sorts of different preprint servers. And the theory was that really by centralizing it, creating a home for that to share CDR preprints and CDR data sets, that we could help kind of tend to, I think, what is a growing culture of open science and carbon dioxide removal. So that's really kind of talking to both the academic researchers and to researchers in companies saying, hey, like, if you want the field to progress as quickly as possible, like, here is a tool to help you do that. I would say the other lever we pull is just doing research ourselves and trying to model what really high quality, transparent, open science on carbon dioxide removal looks like, which includes, really taking the responsibility seriously, not only sharing your results, but also creating tools and sharing your results in a way that makes it easier for the next person to either give you really good feedback or build upon it. And also being transparent about conflicts of interest and funding, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think researchers, no matter what context they're in, are a key audience. And then I think both market actors and policy actors who are making decisions about how to navigate, how to help this very uncertain field take the next step forward, like really trying to help them understand the extent to which learning needs to be a primary goal right now.
I love that, and thanks for a bit of the reframe away from just the zeroing in just on the markets. And I want to come to that in a moment to Vilas, but quickly as a follow-up for you, Freya, you mentioned the interdisciplinary nature of the research in the field. You just give a little snippet of color to that to help the audience sort of paint a picture in their mind of the different disciplines that may or may not be collaborating together or contributing individually to helping our understanding move forward on this.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so taking enhanced rock weathering, just thinking about the physical system, you're taking rocks from a mine somewhere, you're grinding them, transporting them, putting on a field. So that's like farmer field of agronomics. How is it influencing crops? Then it's dissolving, it's moving through the soil system. And then it's moving into streams and estuaries, and then it's moving into the ocean. And at each of these physical phases, you could look at the biology, you can look at the chemistry, you can look at the industrial processes, you can look at the policy. It is, because it is an open system, it is touching just so many disciplines. And to really collectively come to a confident yes on saying we should deploy this at scale, all of those disciplines need to connect.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Vilas, you are out in the market all the time, trying to get that confident yes, I think that Freya just stated, or some version of it, or some early indicator that someone might eventually get to a yes. What are you seeing in those conversations, and this tension that we see in the need for transparency, and also the need for market competitiveness to help this, eventually attract the capital that'll help it grow?
Yeah, I think a couple of the themes that we would hear all the time are, one, a huge amount of belief in the potential of these approaches. I think enhanced rock weathering, in addition to its potential to remove atmospheric carbon, it also has the potential to benefit farmers around the world by consider it an antacid for soils, where it's able to also increase the pH of the soil and counter the acidification that comes from the use of synthetic fertilizer, for example. It can provide really important nutrients to the soil. So there's a lot of belief and validation about its potential. At the same time, the two big themes that are barriers to not just enhanced rock weathering, but a whole family of these, are uncertainty and cost. This is really where learning is at the heart of cracking both of those challenges. So uncertainty, Freya described really elegantly the various Earth systems that this practice crosses through. In order to actually track how much is removed, when did the carbon removal actually happen, when did the atmosphere feel the effect, what would have happened if this project hadn't happened, what's the counterfactual? There's uncertainty in all of these areas. And then there's some really serious hard costs that are involved in any of these projects. Sourcing feedstocks, transporting them to a farm, applying them. And then one very, very big one is the cost of actually measuring the carbon removal, which is kind of this invisible process that is requires some pretty advanced techniques to do. So those are a couple of the barriers. And in order to really crack them, we really need quite a lot of data at scale to be collected. That's really at the heart of this problem. And there are a lot of companies, a lot of actors who are signing up for this challenge of collecting the data to do this. The challenge is who gets access to that data? What's the transparency of that data? And there's two big keys to this. We talk about learning, but where does the learning actually happen? We are a big believer that a public learning cycle needs to happen, that learning, if it happens behind closed doors, really becomes very both fragmented and slow, and it loses the element of public trust. And so I think it's really key that we're able to generate a cycle where projects are collecting data, that data is leading to insights, that insights are improving the way we do projects, but that is happening, at least to some degree, out in the open, so that we're able to build confidence and trust that these processes are actually working, and we're able to optimize them over time. I'll just tee this up, and we can get into it right now or later if we want, but transparency is really scary for a lot of people. Transparency in data comes with risks to a for-profit company's competitive moat, potentially. Every company's board is probably asking them, what's your AI strategy? There are threats to reputation. What happens if this project doesn't work? Do I want that out in the open? There's threats to privacy. Farmers don't want their data to be shared publicly. And so there is this collective action problem where carbon removal will only succeed if we learn and build trust together. But individual actors' incentives are to learn separately. And so that's part of the work we do.
And can you, I think you so well said, can you give us you've had some success, right, in getting folks to start to share and believe in the value of the collective learning. And can you just give us a little flavor of how you all have started to have some wins in that area?
Yeah, we earlier this year, we launched a system called the ERW Data Quarry. We did this actually in partnership with CarbonPlan and in connection with CD Archive, so that data is connected from the data quarry to the preprint repository and data repository. And you can think of the data quarry is a combination of a couple things. It's a set of rules, most importantly, of where different project developers are agreeing to what data should be shared, at what quality, at what granularity. How should conflicts of interest in access to that data be handled? What are the permitted uses of that data? It's a review process for how can somebody request data, and what are risks, what's considered a valid request and potentially a problematic request, and how would those get handled? And then probably the simplest part of the whole thing is the actual technology infrastructure of just shuttling the data from a project developer to an academic to the public. But that's what the data quarry is. But the real hard part of it was, how do you get a diverse group of actors who all have these private incentives to agree to take a step forward at the same time into this common set of rules? A lot of what we heard, and a lot of this work was just listening, was, I will share my data if others do it on a similar basis. I will do this if I have some agency in being able to iterate this over time. I will do this if I have belief that, yes, maybe I'm putting some risk, my business at risk, but I also believe that it's growing the overall pie of opportunity for my company. So those were some of the conversations we had. And we didn't just get project developers on board. We also brought buyers on board critically, so that they were starting to actually require data transparency as a requirement for their offtake contracts, which obviously, as you can imagine, provides quite a lot of incentive for project developers to comply.
Yeah. Yeah, you've described that work to me before as, the quiet shuttle diplomacy, so to speak, of market building, and I really like that. I like that analogy of being the go-between to the buyers, the researchers, or to use sort of the theme from the earlier question to Freya, the interdisciplinary nature of this, and going to different areas of expertise and stakeholders and getting them aligned. And also, great job on picking the word quarry. We now have a theme of well-aligned names in this conversation for a data set around enhanced rock weathering. Maybe we can just kind of move a little bit. The other thing I wanted to say and just to appreciate and call out is, I think that was just a really well-defined and delineated, definition of data governance, right? We often say, sort of in so many fields in which we work here at the McGovern Foundation, and so often in the context of fields where AI solutions may be already in a position to grow or have influence, or where eventually, through greater access to open data, that we're laying the groundwork, right, for the role of AI solutions. Questions of data governance come up very often, and often it's a sort of I've observed it's a bit of a throwaway phrase to sort of capture a bunch of just messy questions we have about data. But I think everything you just described are effectively the things. That's what makes up a really robust conversation about data governance. And it's that hard work that, once it's done, it's done. But when you do get across the finish line, you then, once you've set those rules, so many people can come and play on the metaphorical field. So I just really appreciated the way you described that.
One of the learnings from this whole process was how instrumental it is to start to tackle the data governance question in the early stages of a field. Once a field has moved along, once it's grown, once there are a lot of interests really firmly established and dollars tied up with that, it becomes very hard to shift behavior. But I think part of the reason we've had early success here is because ERW is in this early stage. The norms for data governance haven't yet been shaped. And so there was this moment of opportunity to start steering.
I love that. Let's move a little bit in the direction of just the role of technology and potentially AI. And if we can, I think you both have touched on, one of the open questions is uncertainty, right? We have uncertainty about what will happen, through these various processes, and then measurement of the results of the intervention, measurement of interactions in natural systems that are happening each step of the way. And the way scientists often try to help us answer those questions is through modeling, and modeling is driven by, using past data or data from other scenarios and combining that to create a projection of, future behavior. And we know that that's something that in many contexts and fields, AI is quite good at. Machine learning in particular is quite good at. And so I'm curious, just if maybe I'll come to you, Freya. I don't actually know much about your computer science background, but I'll just impute some perhaps AI adjacency to your training and ask you, given your technical background, I'm just curious, where do you see potential future roles or even current in the field for AI to speed up some of the process of reducing that uncertainty, getting those uncertainty bounds to be a bit narrower so that our projections are giving folks more confidence and we're generally moving this flywheel forward at a bit of a faster pace?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had some adjacency, but disclaimer, I am not an AI expert. So I'll be very curious to hear thoughts from, I'm assuming, people in the audience who know a lot more than me. I think going back to the data challenge that Vilas was just talking about, I think my sense is that before AI can play a transformative role in reducing uncertainty, we just have a lot of work to do in the real world, like getting real data about how these physical systems work. I think that's just a very on-the-ground physical task that's hard to get around. And that underpins not just potential for AI, but also the development of the physical models that are currently being used to estimate what kind of carbon removal open system carbon or CDR approaches achieve. Those physical models that we're currently using are not that good. We are still trying to figure out how good they are. We know they are not capturing everything. There are big gaps. There haven't been model intercomparisons yet. And I wonder if one near-term interesting and exciting role of AI could be building emulators of those physical models, just to make it cheaper and faster to essentially do humongous Monte Carlo experiments and figure out how uncertain those models are. Again, that doesn't reduce our uncertainty, especially with relation to the real world, but it helps us understand those models and understand maybe where we need to make a lot of progress in the real world sampling regime or in model development. I think that's my main sense of where there's a near-term opportunity, but super curious to hear thoughts from you, Nick, or from anyone else.
I think those are great. That is one great example. Maybe Vilas, I'll kick it to you. I may have additional thoughts, but I'd love your thoughts as well, Vilas.
Yeah, a strong agreement with Freya. I think, yes, for sure. I think AI is going to play, a big role in the reduction of uncertainty in ERW and other, especially open system fields. I think we need to be realistic about where we are today, which is in an extremely data poor place. And there's relatively few, relative to what we need. I'm really excited about the momentum that we've seen, but relatively few field trials, large scale data collection efforts. And we need to just be collecting a lot more data in very diverse conditions. And so these mechanistic, we call them process-based models that we use today, it's what does the soil biogeochemistry actually look like? How is water moving? They're really critical for us to actually use to understand how these processes work. And our models are still, those models don't perform very well. That's just where they are. But you can imagine the future, right? Take weather forecasting. It started in a very similar place using atmospheric process models for how the various contributors to weather combine, and you would form ensembles of those models. And the reason that we've gotten to a point where we're able to actually combine process-based models and statistical approaches is because we have a ton of data from all over the world, from all kinds of different data collection platforms, and we need that. I do think there are some near-term opportunities for AI today and in the near term. Like right now, if I'm trying to start a project, there's a lot of data that is needed to just like baseline. I think being able to use the data that is available to cite the right project in the right place based on the right conditions, a predictive model using geospatial analytics can be quite helpful for that and increase the probability of success of a given project. But I think actually using AI to calculate how much carbon has been removed is we're not there yet.
I had one other quick thought.
Yeah, please.
Which was, I mean, I feel like part of the reality of CDR, again, going back to the interdisciplinary nature, is that I think weather is a great example. Like weather forecasts, things like drought, things like big rains, those change the expected carbon removal from something like enhanced track weathering. And to the extent that we can make progress in these adjacent fields where we are better set up to apply AI, and those can feed back into more sophisticated understandings of how open system CDR play out over space and time. I think that's another huge opportunity.
All are great examples. We are toward the final third, I think, of our conversation. And so I want to maybe just put one more topic on the table, and then we'll have space for a couple questions that we have in the chat. But I wonder if you could just sort of stepping back from the specifics of your two organizations' work, and we've talked a bit about the role of technology, and we've talked a lot about data and a bit about technology. Can you just zoom us out a little bit without, and this is a big question, and I know we don't have a ton of time, but like help us contextualize this work in the context of the kind of global set of activities right now working to address climate change and emissions reduction. I think sometimes, depending on the tenor of a conversation, CDR can be framed as a distraction. CDR can be framed as, Vilas, even you sort of alluded to this in one of your opening comments, like we talk about it a lot, but right now it's still a relatively small market. And just give us a sense for when you're out in the field and also looking at, in some ways we have a momentum booster in the fact that there was a CDR pavilion at COP30. But like, just give us a sense for how you see the moment that we're in this particular industry, if I can use the very broad term of industry. Maybe Freya, I'll come to you, and then Vilas.
Yeah. I think what's so funny about CDR is that what makes it unique is its future role. Right now, carbon removal is another form basically of decarbonization, except it's pretty expensive and it's more uncertain. And until we deeply decarbonize, until we take those cheaper, more certain options off the table, that stays true. It is only once we have done deep decarbonization that carbon removal steps in and unlocks net zero and hopefully that negativity. So there's this very funny tension of like, yes, we think it merits investment right now because it's going to take a long time to develop, but its real utility is way far out. And it can't distract from decarbonization. So I think, yeah, David Ho, who's a researcher in this space, he always says something like, we should pursue decarbonization like CDR won't exist, and we should pursue CDR like we believe net negativity is possible. And I think that just like hits it on the head. Yeah, Vilas, what would you say?
I hadn't heard that quote. I really like that. So yeah, I think I was actually earlier this week down in Belém for COP30 and was at the CDR pavilion as well as like many other pavilions. And I guess how would I characterize it? I think one thing that was notable is just how I think the conversation has begun to shift of acknowledging the need for carbon removal. Just going back to Freya's opening remarks, that this is something that is needed, that it isn't a substitute for emissions reduction, but we also can't wait until we've reduced to begin working on it, because at that point there's this huge scale up challenge that we've been talking about. And so I think there was more of a recognition about the criticality of carbon removal in combating the climate emergency. And it was really notable to hear governments talk about that more. And so, I would say it's more doors opening for, CDR also, I feel like sometimes is this like small world of actors. It's been really nice to see it getting on more of the main stage of awareness, of folks considering what are the investments required to pursue it well. And so, it's a good direction, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Love it. I didn't realize we were going to get a report directly from the field. Welcome back from the trip. And that's really, really helpful. Thank you. Let's move over to a couple of questions that we have in the chat. The first is, and if there are others watching who might want to add one, please feel free to do so. The first is whether there may be a role for synthetic data in some of the modeling that we were talking about, maybe for pre-training models before some of the field data is collected. I'm curious if you've heard researchers thinking in that direction, companies, Vilas, maybe that you talked to. Any thoughts there?
Freya, I don't know if I could kick it over to you. I think the answer is yes, but then the quality of your synthetic data is really dependent on ultimately ground truth data. Mm-hmm. And so, there is just to be clear, there are models that are being developed and iterated on, and some degree of like synthetic data, if I'm understanding the question well, to be able to have some assumptions plugged into the various requirements of these models where we don't yet have significant data collected is happening. But I think ultimately just like what do the probability distributions for these values in different contexts look like? That's where the real hardness is. For any thoughts on that?
I think there are examples of researchers using synthetic data to ask questions, and still, if we want to know actually what happened in the real world for the atmosphere, deep limits to the utility of that unless we have really good validation data. So.
That makes sense. And that's a nice bridge over to the next question, which is just about the processes for actually ground truthing, collecting ground truth data. This question says, do low-cost IoT devices play a role in unlocking massive amounts of ground truth data? Or are they still not viable due to historic reasons like cost, theft, malfunction, et cetera? Like, what's the cutting edge right now for data collection, particularly, and this is me editorializing, particularly in the context of the cost challenges that you were alluding to earlier? Either one of you, whoever wants to jump in, it's great.
I am not a field scientist. I am not a geochemist. I'm not an agronomist. So grain of salt, we should go talk to the people who are actually making this stuff work in the field. I think one really interesting possibility here, markets historically you have a project developer showing up to a field and putting rocks down, and a lot of the measurement has been in that field itself. And then you model everything else as the water travels through the soils and out to the ocean eventually. And I think there's some really interesting possibilities for lower cost, maybe IoT data collection when it comes to thinking about more aggregated modeling. If you didn't have to attribute carbon removal outcomes to a particular actor on a particular field, what is unlocked? And again, that goes back to like, are we using markets or are we using other policy mechanisms? But like, water sampling is a lot easier than digging a meter deep soil pit. And like, are there possibilities there? So again, I am not an expert in devices, but that's where my mind goes, is like, is there more room for creativity around the like scale, both spatial and temporal, of measurement that unlocks cheaper data and other tools?
Yeah, this is something I'm really excited by. Before Cascade, I was working at an ag sensor company, and have suffered the pains of all the different problems you need to solve to do this well. But just to give one example, one of the main ways to actually measure carbon removal via enhanced rock weathering is to measure the alkalinity in soil pore water. And one of the normal ways that that's done is to install what's called a lysimeter. Actually installing those and then maintaining and managing them is extremely painful. It requires responding within X number of days after a rain event. You need labor on call, ready to go, and the quality of that data is really suspect sometimes. And so there are companies that are actually developing both like higher fidelity and lower cost devices that are going to be extremely helpful. So I've been pretty excited about those developments. Still ways to go, but I do think it's part of the solution.
Excellent. Well, I just noticed early, I actually don't know if our comments when we retain this video, for those who might watch in the future, I don't know if the comments stick around. So I just wanted to appreciate Tyler Kukla in the comment thread for an answer on the synthetic data question. I'm just going to read it out. As an ERW researcher, he says one thing the community is using synthetic data for is asking questions around, sorry, the comment bumped there, are asking questions around the kind of sampling density and effort required for a detectable carbon removal signal. But for now, our total pool of data is so sparse that it's hard to know whether a synthetic data set is truly representative. Thank you, Tyler, for jumping in on that. I appreciate it. Maybe we have time for one more. There's a question for Freya that says, beyond enhanced rock weathering, could you talk about other forms of CDR you see as high potential and the role for data and AI in accelerating learning or markets for those forms of CDR? You touched on maybe a couple, but if you could just maybe revisit that, expand a smidge.
Yeah. There's such a big world. Some ideas. I think that this is an area, again, that I'm like not super deep on, but I feel like the world of synthetic biology is really underdeveloped in CDR. And I feel kind of perpetually curious about that. And I wonder if there are analogs to like the AI role in protein folding that could come to bear on exploring synthetic biology possibilities. I think there's a whole family of CDR approaches that I really care about, both because they have a big potential and because they have huge risk, which are based on using biomass. So basically relying on the natural carbon sink that is forests or our ag lands, and taking the carbon that's captured by biomass and storing it somewhere. What's amazing about that is we already have a capture mechanism. Plants are so amazing at photosynthesis. They do it for us, like, hallelujah. The danger is that we do not have a good history of relying on biomass in ways that don't cause really bad consequences to the capacity of that natural carbon sink. We've really messed things up, for example, with corn ethanol, thinking that it was a really great step forward for climate outcomes, for making fuels that are low carbon. And really, when you like take a full system view, because of the land use change you cause by new corn demand, the net outcome for the atmosphere is pretty bad. So I think I'm very curious about the possibility. Right now, we don't have good systems for tracking or governing flows of biomass as it like where was it harvested? How is that sink doing? Who buys it and who ultimately uses it for what purpose? I'm really curious if there are some intersections there for AI, for this kind of more like watchdoggy role. Those are two that jump to mind, but again, like there are a myriad CDR interventions, and I'm sure people who are more creative than me could think about lots of other examples of opportunities for learning.
Sorry, I muted. I lost track of mute for a moment. Thank you. I love that. The last question was directed at Freya. Anything you want to add maybe before we wrap up on that question?
I'll say I love what Freya said. There's a big world out there. I think even though a lot of these pathways have been studied for decades, we're constantly finding new approaches. I'm personally extremely just curious and fascinated by this branch of carbon removal, which is around alkalinity enhancement, not just on soils, but in rivers and oceans, because it has this really two-part benefit of there's the thermodynamic benefit of not requiring significant amounts of capital, like the acid-base reactions happen fairly efficiently. And then it also has this non-specifically climate benefit to a private actor in some cases, or to the public in addition, where it can counter acidification. And I think these are really understudied. They have a lot of complexity because of the systems that they're operating in. They're hard to quantify, but they just have so much promise that I'm really excited for the advances to come there. I mean, one of the big challenges is like no one has heard of enhanced rock weathering on the mainstream stage. No one has heard of ocean alkalinity enhancement. So just the public education and awareness process here we're at the early days of, but I find it very exciting.
So well said. Thank you. And I think what you just said is maybe a nice theme to close on, and it builds on something that Freya said. It's in some ways, despite this momentum, still early days, and this is really about building, infrastructure today for something that's going to see, if we're successful, really scale well into the future. So I'll thank you all on behalf of our collective future for the work that you're doing, and for the time, for joining us today, giving us a bit of your expertise. Really appreciate it. It's been a joy to work with you both, and we continue to just really value all that you're doing for the world. So thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for taking the time out of your Friday to join us. Hope it was illuminating and educational for you, and hope you'll join us next time. So thank you, Vilas. Thank you, Freya.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.